Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I really want to acknowledge my colleagues who are here, Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser, Oregon Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum, New York Attorney General Letitia James. I want to thank them for their partnership. The work that we do together as state AGs is really important, and this has been a great collective effort. I also want to thank the team from Massachusetts and the Attorney General's office here who worked really tirelessly on this case. Assistant Attorneys General Jenny Wojiwoda, Sandy Alexander, Jillian Feiner, Eric Gold, with assistance from a number of other individuals, Julia Walsh, Philip Nowick, Indira Rao, Marley Greer, Chris Kelly, Paula McManus, Ethan Marks included. It's important that I name them because indeed this represents an outstanding effort by men and women within my Attorney General's office and AG's offices around the country. Today's announcement is the culmination of years of work as we sought to uncover the abuses, the deceptions, the harm wrought by so many that resulted in such devastation for families all across this country. I want to give a special nod to the Massachusetts team for first uncovering McKinsey's misconduct and launching an investigation. And I am grateful for all of our states and our collective leadership in achieving this resolution for our families. For me, I'm here today because I made a promise. I made a promise to families in Massachusetts who've been hurt by this opioid epidemic, a promise that we wouldn't stop fighting and that we would hold those accountable who created and profited off of the opioid epidemic. I just got off a call a short while ago with members of our Family Advisory Council. These are parents, local officials, community advocates, family members impacted by the opioid crisis. And I wanted to share with them the news of this announcement because it's about the families in Massachusetts and all across this country who've been so harmed by the opioid crisis. They're the reason why we do this work day in and day out. Today is an important moment for accountability for those families. We know the opioid epidemic is one of the most devastating crises of our time. The rise in opioid prescriptions caused an equally devastating rise in substance use disorder, overdoses, and deaths. We continue to see it every day in our communities. But today, a coalition of 53 attorneys general representing 47 states, the District of Columbia, and 5 U.S. territories together announce a $570 million settlement with one of the world's largest consulting firms, McKinsey & Company. This follows our investigations into McKinsey's extensive work for opioid companies, promoting their drugs and profiting from the opioid epidemic. This agreement with McKinsey is the first multi-state opioid settlement to result in substantial payment to the states to address this epidemic. Nearly every dollar of this settlement will go directly to support treatment, prevention, and recovery efforts. State AGs have been at this work for years. We've made protecting our residents from this public health crisis a top priority. And through that work, we uncovered illegal opioid marketing schemes that extended far beyond this company, far beyond the companies that were the initial targets of our investigation, including Purdue, the seller of the infamous opioid OxyContin. Now, as a result of our investigations, the evidence is clear where many of the schemes actually came from. McKinsey consultants who met privately with members of the Sackler family, who pitched a plan to boost sales, who moved quickly to help them make millions off of OxyContin. Meanwhile, thousands of Americans have become addicted, overdosed, and died. I'll talk a little bit more about just how dangerous and illegal this partnership between McKinsey and the people behind Purdue truly was. Through a project McKinsey referred to as, quote, turbocharging the sales engine, McKinsey told Purdue and the Sacklers how to sell more OxyContin by drastically increasing sales calls on high volume prescribers, by encouraging opioid makers to band together to avoid FDA restrictions on oxy sales that could cause a loss of revenue, by scheduling ride-alongs with McKinsey consultants, including right here in Massachusetts, to diagnose how they promoted OxyContin. and by tailoring messages and strategies to get doctors to prescribe more and more of the stuff to their patients. After, quote, turbocharging sales, those are the words McKinsey actually used. After turbocharging sales, McKinsey even advised Purdue to enter into the market for opioid treatment medications, a further attempt to make even more money off of the addiction that McKinsey and Purdue had caused. But their strategies to increase Purdue's profits didn't end there. McKinsey's consultants were very much aware of the dangers of opioids. They even proposed to Purdue how it could pay insurance companies a rebate for each patient who overdosed on OxyContin in order to maintain those business relationships. Later, when my office sued and a chain of lawsuits followed, senior McKinsey consultants discussed deleting all their documents and emails. The public document repository that is required by today's agreement is important because it ensures that the full story of McKinsey's opioid misconduct will now be known in perpetuity with full transparency. Likewise, the payment required from McKinsey sets a high standard for accountability. McKinsey will pay $573 million, which is many more times than the fees it received from its opioid sales. So for Massachusetts, I'll tell you what this means. We know that the opioid epidemic isn't going away in our state or anywhere else in this country for this matter. In fact, it's only getting worse. In Massachusetts, we continue to lose nearly 2,000 people a year. The numbers are climbing. On top of that, the COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated the harm and disproportionately impacted our communities of color. As of today's settlement, Massachusetts is going to receive $13 million from McKinsey in short order, with the majority going to our state's newly created Opioid Recovery and Remediation Fund. This will help expand equitable access to opioid use disorder, prevention, intervention, treatment, and recovery options. And what's more, within 9 months, McKinsey will be required to turn over and post tens of thousands of its own documents to be made public in an online document repository for the benefit of researchers, the press, and the public. Today's agreement is significant. It ensures transparency. It holds McKinsey accountable, and it answers a demand that attorneys general have heard from families in every state who've seen their loved ones hurt and killed by the opioid crisis and who want the truth exposed. Our work at the Attorney General's office doesn't end here. We'll continue to lead the way when it comes to combating this epidemic, investigating companies that break the law, going after traffickers, changing prescribing practices, continuing to make Narcan available, providing prevention education across the state. And we're going to keep working for justice and accountability from the perpetrators of this crisis. We owe it to the loved ones that we've lost, to the advocates who've called out for justice, and to the people we still have an opportunity to protect. And for every public services firm and institution, organization, company out there, let this be a loud and clear message to all of you. Carefully consider your ethics and responsibilities when it comes to discharging the work that you perform. McKinsey is a big deal. They're a big company retained by a number of governments, agencies, and other companies. This complaint makes clear the role that they played, and today they're held accountable. I'm now going to turn it over to my good friend and colleague, Attorney General Phil Weiser from Colorado, whose office and whose team has been incredible partners in really demonstrated incredible leadership in both the investigation and in reaching this significant resolution today. General Weiser.
Thank you, General Healey. Your leadership and the collaboration between these offices is a testament to what we can do together. What 47 states and a number of territories have done here is precedent setting. For Colorado, this is the first settlement dollars to address the opioid epidemic. What has happened over the last 20 years in our nation is unlike any other country in the world. We had a crisis. We have lost thousands upon thousands of people. Communities have been devastated. And today, we announce here in Colorado and other states funds that will be coming in short order to remediate this crisis. On the Colorado team, our first Assistant Attorney General, Leslie Eaton, along with incredible, amazing hard work, Megan Rudlett and Brady Grassmeyer. We were on the front lines of this effort almost 2 years ago, working with Massachusetts to tell this story, to understand the story. What happened? How did it happen? And what do we do about it? But before I get to that story, I want to start with something that hit me really hard, which is in the summer 2017, while I was a candidate for this office, I visited our San Luis Valley, Alamosa, Colorado, one of the hardest communities in the United States. The sheriff there, Robert Jackson, showed me his jail and talked about the fact that 90% of the individuals in the Alamosa County Jail are addicted to opioids. That was true then, it's true now. And he said, this is not the right way to address a public health crisis. We need more drug treatment. We need more recovery efforts because people aren't getting better. And even worse than that, when people leave jail after going through effective detox, they're 100 times more likely to overdose. And I've spoken to moms of kids who've overdosed. This crisis is hurting lives and families and communities. And in the San Luis Valley, when I talked to this special community about its economic future, I was stopped dead in my tracks. We can't talk about our economic future, I was told, until we deal with this opioid crisis. This is an imperative as a moral matter, as an economic matter, and as a social matter. And while I was having those conversations, McKinsey partners were, as General Healey put it, seeking to turbocharge a tragic undertaking. And when others said, maybe we should slow down the push of these deadly drugs, these McKinsey partners didn't. They didn't act responsibly. They put profit over people's lives. And then, as General Healey said, when the investigation started, they said, how can we destroy the documents? And so these partners acted reprehensibly. What we're here today is because McKinsey and Company stepped up to say, we are going to take responsibility. We are going to not fight in litigation, not resist a fair settlement. We want to be a part of helping to solve this problem. I would point out that those who own Purdue Pharma, the Sackler family, have yet to come to that position. We, as state AGs, will and are litigating for fair results where we need to. We are seeking accountability, and we're seeking a reckoning with this crisis that has devastated so many lives, families, and communities. And that's why this document repository is important. Like state AGs did in tobacco, we're committed to telling the story, to sunlight as the best of disinfectants, so that we can look back and, as General Healey said, ask why, how did we allow this to happen here in the United States of America, and it didn't happen elsewhere? It's because people like these McKinsey partners were willfully blind to the consequences of their actions. We can't have this. We have to recognize that we're all in this together. We have to be a part of solving this together. And that's why the funds that are coming are critical to addressing this crisis. And we in Colorado are working with our local government partners to develop a framework to do that, to address communities like Alamosa, like our Eastern Plains, like our cities with devastating effects. We have a lot of work to do. And this is an important step forward. And finally, I will note McKinsey is also now agreeing to a set of protective provisions to prevent behavior like this again, whether it's the destruction of documents or working with companies pushing dangerous drugs. Today's settlement has injunctive terms that govern how the company behaves. Again, this was a team effort, and part of our partnership involved working with offices across the US, including in Oregon, where my good friend, Ellen Rosenblum, is the Attorney General and will take the baton and speak next.
Thank you, Attorney General Weiser, and thank you to my colleague from Massachusetts, Attorney General Maura Healey. I'm also honored to be here today with our colleague from New York, Tish James, who will speak after me. And thank you both for sharing the details of this major announcement. It is always really great when our states can work together to achieve big things. And today feels like a monumental first step to hold accountable those who put profits before people and triggered the opioid epidemic with unconscionable sales and marketing tactics. And I want to echo what both Maura and Phil have said about the impact of this devastating crisis across the country. No state, no community, no family has been spared. This settlement represents a major milestone in our collective fight to address the national opioid epidemic. And as you've heard, this is the first multi-state settlement to result in substantial payment to the states to address the national opioid epidemic. But just as important, it makes public, as Phil just mentioned, it makes public documents at the heart of the epidemic so that scholars, journalists, and the public can learn what went wrong so that it never happens again. And as also been noted, there are other cases pending, and I certainly hope this will not be the last of these major multi-state settlements. Our teams are working very hard, so stay tuned. For years, McKinsey gave fuel to the opioid crisis by teaching the drug manufacturers who made these addictive pills how to sell more pills at higher dosages and to get doctors to write more prescriptions. And when we think about who is to blame for this national crisis of prescription pain pills, you know, we think of many of the same actors. We think of big pharma, we think of manufacturers, distributors, doctors who are incentivized to write prescriptions. But we don't typically think of large consulting companies doing work for their clients. But the reason we're here today is because we're now adding a consulting company to the list of bad actors who helped lay the groundwork with their clients for America's addiction to pain pills. McKinsey shares responsibility in this national tragedy, which has plagued our states and caused hundreds of thousands of deaths around the country. And I am certainly glad, again, as AG Weiser just stated, thank you to McKinsey. Thank you for seeing the light, finally. Thank you for agreeing not to push this all the way into the courtroom. We certainly do appreciate that. In Oregon, I'm especially proud that our share of today's settlement will be deposited into the Drug Treatment and Recovery Services Fund. It's an account that was recently created by the voters of Oregon in 2020 to treat substance use disorder as a public health problem and to provide necessary treatment to Oregonians who are in need. And this funding is particularly significant right now in Oregon, where the needs for screening and treatment have increased dramatically as a result of this ballot measure that was passed. Again, I cannot stress enough how important these recovery dollars will be to small states like Oregon and of course large states as well. This money will not reclaim lives, but it will hopefully allow us the process of helping Oregonians who are struggling now. Thank you very much. And thank you to my team. Thank you to David Hart, an amazing lawyer in my office who has been working on these cases literally for decades. I think someday he wants to retire, but I'm not going to let him until we've resolved all these matters. His team, thank you to you and your team, David, and of course to my deputy, Fred Boss, who has been with us all the way. And now I would like to turn it over to my wonderful colleague from the Big Apple, Attorney General Tish James.
Thank you, Attorney General Rosenblum. And thank you, Attorneys General Healey, as well as Weiser. And thank you to all of the Attorney Generals and the Executive Committee and all the attorneys across this nation who were part of this settlement. It's really a testament to the desire to get this done, but also a sad testament to the fact that opioids has affected all of us, all across this nation. No one is immune. The opioid crisis has hit every corner of this nation. 500,000 are dead. Families are destroyed. Opportunities are gone. And every single day, this nation suffers 130 overdose deaths a day. In New York, that number is 9. And according to federal data, there have been over 81,000 drug overdose deaths from May 2019 to May 2020. And it's important that we put a face to these individuals. It's important that we recognize that they were family members, mothers and fathers, and sisters. Many of them were young, full of potential before they were ensnared in the deadly trap. And it's important to know that most of them just had pain. They had a toothache, they had surgery, they were dealing with pain. And somehow they got ensnared into the deadly trap of drug abuse from those who eagerly and illicitly profited from their pain. I can recall in 2019, I visited with some of these families who were broken in Buffalo, New York. And I remember the stories. I learned about a young man named Michael. I keep a picture of Michael in my office. Michael had a lot of promise. Michael wanted to grow up and to be an attorney. But Michael, unfortunately, got caught up in opioids. I held his mother and his father in my arms. I remember their tears on their face and the faces of all of the family members who were in a circle. And all of them just looked down on the floor and wrenched their hands. Some of them held their pictures of the loved ones close to their hearts. They all told me their stories. And those stories really strengthened my resolve to hold those responsible for this epidemic, which has only gotten worse during COVID-19 as a result of individuals who are socially isolated and who unfortunately cannot get to their treatment clinics. And it's unfortunate that, again, Michael was overprescribed and got eventually addicted to opioids. And then Michael committed suicide in 2011. He was 20. Michael Israel of Buffalo, New York. He committed suicide after being overprescribed opioids. And while devastated by his death and frustrated by the failure and multiple levels of our healthcare system, Michael's parents have channeled their pain into an addiction evaluation and education and treatment program. It's called Save the Michael's House of Hope. The center offers addiction, education, classes, and a directory of available treatment services in the Buffalo area, a place where grieving and guilt-ridden families can gather for comfort and for healing. And there are so many of these centers around New York State. And I also can recall going to other parts of the state where individuals cried out to me and they said, Tish, we need more beds. We need more funding. And I hope that you can stand true to your word and hold these individuals accountable. Today, I'm doing just that. And so we've already filed one of the nation's most extensive lawsuits here in New York against the manufacturers and distributors of the opioid crisis. But McKinsey's cynical and calculated marketing tactics help further fuel this crisis by specifically helping Purdue Pharma target these doctors they knew would be over-prescribing these opioids. McKinsey knew where the money was coming from, and they zeroed right in on it. But under the terms of today's agreement, the company will finally end its illegal conduct, deliver more than $500 million into communities all across this nation, including more than 32 million here in New York. And it will never be able to help perpetuate this type of fraud and deception again. We're holding McKinsey's feet to the fire and are getting them to release tens of thousands of internal documents detailing work for Purdue and others for public disclosure online so that Americans can finally know the truth. because transparency and accountability is really key to addressing this crisis. This is the first time a consultant has answered at this level for this type of fraud. And no amount of money I know will ever compensate for the loss of Michael and/or the millions of Michaels across this nation. But today's agreement will ensure a company responsible for this crisis will help to fund prevention and education and treatment programs so we can stop additional New Yorkers and Americans nationwide from being addicted to opioids in the first place. Because as my colleague mentioned, this is a healthcare crisis and it should be treated as such. We can't lock our way out of this. We can't arrest our way out of this. What we need to do is make sure that there are resources available for treatment and education and prevention, and to fund healthcare centers all across this nation to provide beds to those who need it. This is just the beginning of our fight for justice for victims. I ran for this office and for all public offices all throughout my career because I believe in one mantra, and that is justice. Simple and sweet justice. And we will continue to do everything in our power to prevent this industry from hooking more patients on drugs and causing yet additional harm and holding them accountable. Of course, I want to thank the staff from all of the states who worked on this, all of the staff members in the executive committee, but I want to thank my incredible team who worked day and night. They're true heroes and true professionals. David Nachman, the Counsel for Opioids and Impact Litigation, who has been leading New York in all of our efforts to hold opioid companies available, and including the Sackler family. Senior Advisor and Special Counsel Umair Khan, Assistant Attorney General Noah Pop, Assistant Attorney General Jennifer Simkovich, and all of those who worked under the leadership of Jennifer Levy. I just want to thank you for believing and recognizing that we are here to move mountains and to bring justice to all of those families who are struggling. Thank my colleagues today, and thank all of the attorneys general across the nation, all of those who were part of this settlement. Thank you for standing up, and thank you for fighting back. And now I believe we're going to open it up for questions.
Indeed. Thank you, Tish, and thank you to all the terrific partners and colleagues on this call for your leadership on this in so many fronts. I think Jillian will just remind us to put any questions you have in the chat.
That's right. So we'll start it off here with Andrew Edgecliffe Johnson from the Financial Times. This is addressed to anyone who wants to answer it. McKinsey has advised several states over the years. Does this case change your state's willingness to work with it in the future?
Let me answer with one quick point, which we hadn't mentioned. There is a conflict of interest protective provision in the injunctive terms. Part of what happened during this situation was McKinsey not only was advising Purdue and other companies how to push out more opioids, they were at the same time advising governments around the opioid epidemic, and having a serious conflict of interest protection so that governments aren't in effect getting conflicted guidance is a critical benefit of this proposal, of this settlement.
And I would just add, I think it's absolutely essential that any government actor or entity with contracts or contemplating contracts with any professional services firm or entity, including McKinsey, make sure you do your homework and take a hard look and understand where they've been and where they purport to be going. I do expect that and would hope that would happen, particularly from government agencies expending taxpayer money.
And again, as part of this settlement, McKinsey has promised not to work on any Schedule II or narcotics-free drugs like opioids for any clients. And so I think it's really critically important that individuals understand that and also understand the conflicts issue that is embedded in the settlement as well.
Great. This
And
next,
I agree with my colleagues. We'll take it on a case-by-case basis. Certainly have not ruled out working with McKinsey in the future. We are pleased at this agreement, and there's some really strong provisions, and we would want them to keep those in mind in any future communications or work that we might, engage in together.
thank you. This next question is from Sarah Randazzo at the Wall Street Journal. Question for any of the AGs. Can you comment on how this deal was able to seemingly come together quickly with broad state participation when the $26 billion deal with distributors and J&J has been in talks for 18 or so months now and still isn't done? Did the absence of outside plaintiffs' lawyers on this deal help it move faster?
I actually want to thank McKinsey for stepping up and doing the right thing. I want to thank them for coming to the table. I hope that other companies will follow and McKinsey has led by example. And so all of the other companies that we are negotiating really should take heed. McKinsey, again, should be thanked for coming to the table, resolving this, and for recognizing the harm that they caused all across this nation.
And what I think it reflects is just really terrific lawyering from AG's offices. This is what we do. We get after it. We send out subpoenas. We get documents. We review documents. As you know, we engaged in extensive investigation prior to the filing of our lawsuit in Massachusetts against Purdue and the Sackler family members. From some of those documents, my team was able to identify documents related to McKinsey and their specific engagement and involvement and work over a near 15-year period with McKinsey, both prior to and after McKinsey saw that its client Purdue entered a criminal plea agreement in 2007 for its abuses with respect to sales of OxyContin. So McKinsey was a longtime partner of Purdue's during the course of Purdue's explosive growth and sales of OxyContin. So that's how this came to be. And you had a few states that put a lot of resources into it to put together what became a really undeniable complaint and really damning complaint, laying out in some detail what had happened. I think more importantly, you'll see that much more of the story will become clear in 9 months when those documents are online. So while I appreciate the resolution that was able to be reached today, I think it represents the force of investigation and the force of really the application of facts to law. There was no other way but to go with this one. And I think the size of the recovery, as well as the really significant terms of accountability, both speak to the significance of this matter. And also, I think McKinsey's apprehension and understanding that what it did was highly egregious, highly problematic, and certainly would continue to cause their business harm going forward. So good news today, good resolution, money to the states for the first time directly to abatement, along with other important terms of relief. But again, I think the credit here goes to state AGs and the lawyers and the teams that laid it out in really stark detail.
Well, and I don't mean to make light of the situation, but it wouldn't not necessarily be a bad idea for McKinsey to provide some free consulting services to these companies and make sure that they come to the table, because what McKinsey did was very smart on their part, and these other companies are not acting smartly if they don't do the same.
To put a fine point on this, what's different about this was McKinsey had a sincere commitment to righting this wrong and taking responsibility. I, like many state AGs, have a policy. I wouldn't just file a complaint because the complaint is compelling and because we want to be in litigation. We're solving problems. And thus the first step is to sit around the table, virtual table here, and say, we see a problem, what do you see? And what McKinsey said is, we see an opportunity to own this, to address this, and to make sure that doesn't happen again, for us, and that is an example. And the Sacklers are being sued with compelling complaints. Others are being sued. This is an example. This is a first step and a sign of the more work to do ahead.
And I do think to your question, the absence of outside counsel, from my perspective, is a factor. I believe that as state AGs, we are more than capable of doing the work on behalf of our offices and recovering and delivering for the people in our states. There's no better example of it than what you see today in this 53 state resolution. And it's not to say there isn't room for outside counsel, but I believe certainly the presence of outside counsel and any number of competing concerns that seem to be prevalent with respect to investigation and resolution of other opioid related matters is a difference here. And again, I credit the state AGs and our teams for working expeditiously, thoroughly, and nimbly to get justice, as General James says. This is what it's about: accountability and justice. And we were able to secure that here in quick fashion as a result of that work.
Thank you. The next question is from Sam Quinones, the author. What evidence do you have that the strategies of promoting OxyContin to doctors who were already prescribing a lot came from McKinsey? Didn't Purdue Pharma already know this was crucial to their business model?
Let me mention this, and Sam, with great appreciation for your work that has influenced all of us, telling the story so well. Thank you. You'll see in the complaint documented McKinsey providing both advice and oversight and implementation, this turbocharging strategy. As has been mentioned, the idea of targeting the doctors who prescribed too much already for engagement and to encourage even more prescribing is a reprehensible and outrageous conduct, which we know has contributed greatly to the crisis we're facing. When other actors sought to put the brakes on what was happening, either executives within Purdue Pharma or outside entities, the McKinsey consultants sought to find ways around that and to still drive more opioids into the market. And so McKinsey's conduct, both in the strategy phase and also in the oversight and implementation phase, through these particular consultants who were putting profit front and center, and as General James said, over people's lives. It's manifest, it's in the documents, and then as General Healey said, once all the documents come out in 9 months, there'll be even a fuller story about how hand in glove and deeply involved these McKinsey consultants were, even working with the Sackler family members themselves.
McKinsey, basically violated these unfair practices laws. They aggressively, let me underscore aggressive, they aggressively promoted and sold more opioids to more patients for longer periods of times. And so it's really critically important that individuals understand how they violated state consumer laws, trade practices, unfair trade practices, and they devised these plans to basically market and sell opioids to Purdue and others. And so as a result of that, they are being held accountable. And that's why we are here today to announce this settlement.
And I urge you to read our complaints carefully. We're all going to be filing complaints or possibly already have. This morning, the Oregon complaint, which is very similar to the others. I urge you to read paragraphs 23 through 26 to answer your question. Very clear.
Thank you.
And Sam, just to put a fine point on some of this, remember, Purdue retained McKinsey in 2004. It continued that relationship through or until 2019. And during that time, McKinsey was actually at the table advising the Purdue Executive Committee, the Purdue Board, as well as members of the Sackler family. An example articulated in the complaint is this program to, quote, turbocharge sales. But what did that actually mean? It meant McKinsey drafting and supplying the actual message to target prescribers to increase sales volumes. It meant doing ride-alongs with actual Purdue reps so as to evaluate how they were doing their visits and whether or not they were hard and aggressive enough with the messaging that would result in more sales. Advising Purdue to promote the so-called abuse deterrent product to address prescriber concerns about risk. When there was a pharmacy chain that was expressing concern about Purdue's sales, it was McKinsey stressing to Purdue that they needed to, quote, take action on this issue, and McKinsey suggested to Purdue that it ought to engage in senior level discussions with the pharmacy chain, increase advocacy efforts with patient advocacy groups to clamor against dispensing limits. Okay, so there's no doubt, as previously pled in our action against Purdue and the Sacklers, there's a lot of culpability to go around, but make no mistake about it, McKinsey was in the room from 2004 on, and that's why you see the action taken today.
Thank you. The next question is from John Daly, Colorado Public Radio. Question for AG Weiser. Can you briefly summarize where things stand with the other cases? What impact do you think this settlement could have on the other cases?
Thanks, John, and thank you for your reporting on this topic. This is a powerful example. This shows what taking responsibility looks like. And this, I believe, will absolutely motivate others to recognize their contributions and take seriously addressing the harm. I know I speak for all the state AGs. We do not want to be in litigation for years on this, spending money and resources while people are dying. We want to get fair settlements now. And this shows what that looks like. This shows what taking responsibility looks like. Others need to follow suit.
Thank you. The next question is from Brenda Sandberg from the Pink Sheet. To anyone here, can you comment on the progress of global settlements with manufacturers and distributors?
We cannot give details in regards to pending litigation. Let's just say that it's ongoing.
I was going to use the same word. We're very busy. It's very active, and it's probably not productive at the moment to try to go into the details. You know, there's some sausage making going on.
Thank you. This question is from Lilia from Paris, France, working for France 2 national TV channel. Question for AG Healey or any of the other AGs. McKinsey is advising the French government on its vaccination campaign. I feel like McKinsey could be dangerous when it comes to health issues. Would you warn the French authorities about McKinsey's methods?
Look, as I said earlier, McKinsey has contracts with a number of governments, countries, states, cities, and the like. And, you know, I think that, as was noted, what this settlement will require is that McKinsey is going to have a heightened level of attention to ethics and conflicts issues, and we expect them to avoid those issues going forward. And with respect to any determinations that any one contracting entity wants to make, that is up to them, of course. And, you know, our hope is that an expectation is that as McKinsey continues its business, whether it's in contracts with public entities or non-public entities, it do so having learned the lessons of this engagement.
Thank you. This question is from Avi Israel. Will the money for New York State go directly to help the people and not to the general fund?
Hello, Avi. It's great to hear from you. Thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And thank you for covering this issue. Avi, yes, the $32 million that New York State will get, an additional money over the next 4 years, but most of it, 80% of the money New York will get up front, will go for prevention, education, and we are currently negotiating, as you know, with the state legislature, with the governor, with regards to a piece of legislation which will determine where the funds will go. But all of the funds will go, again, to address the opioid crisis. And it's important to know that this opioid crisis, unfortunately, has only been aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you. This question is to anyone from Abrams Media. McKinsey made a point of noting that the settlement does not include an admission of guilt. I understand that these sorts of clauses are common in deals like these, but how do you respond to those who would be disappointed by the firm not explicitly admitting wrongdoing?
I would say that the firm is accepting responsibility. It is taking action. It is putting in very protective measures to avoid challenges like this, whether it's consulting with drug companies, not protecting documents, or otherwise violating ethical issues. So this is a very meaningful settlement. This addresses the concerns that we have. And for me, that is positive, particularly in the light that we haven't seen this yet before. This is precedent setting and paving the way for others to follow suit.
And this settlement is civil in nature, and none of the attorney generals have released any criminal claims.
Please read the complaints that we filed, and please read the stipulated judgment. You can read between the lines to understand what happened here, and also think about the fact that were these cases to go to trial, it would not only be very, very expensive and take years, and we don't know when we would see the money, which we need for the treatment and the prevention and the education. If you think about the fact that we will have over $500 million in hand in just a few weeks among all the states. Oregon will have $7.6 million. It's less than 32, but we're a smaller state than New York. We can use this money right away for this, as I indicated earlier, brand new program that we have as a result of the people of Oregon having voted it in. It's going into a fund that is exclusively for the purposes of addressing the epidemic. And I want to thank not only the people of Oregon, but our legislative team and governor's office for approving putting the money into this place. So if you take all that into consideration, I think that we have served the public, and that the public should be pleased that we're not going to drag this out, and that McKinsey's not going to drag it out for years.
And I just add that, it is common to see a complaint filed with a consent judgment that is then entered by the court. So as of today, there will be judgments and complaints filed in all of our jurisdictions. And those judgments set forth the relief that McKinsey is obligated to fulfill. I think as importantly is the fact that one of those terms is the creation of this document repository between what is set forth in the complaint and what we will soon see by way of what is contained in the document repository. There will be no question about what McKinsey did. And that accountability to the people that we serve, to the media, to the public is an imperative part of our job, and we certainly achieved that here.
Can I just say that Avi Israel is on the call. He is the father of Michael, and all of the attorney generals. Avi, you're in our thoughts and in our prayers, as well as all of the family members who have lost loved ones. And we do this, I know in New York, we do this in honor of Michael. Thank you for allowing me to say that.
No, thank you, Tish. And Avi, Michael's memory is for a blessing, and it is meaningful that you have turned this tragedy, like so many parents I know, into a purpose to address this crisis.
Yeah, and having just spent time this morning with families here to talk about this, I think it is understandable, and it's really hard sometimes to put into words, although, General James spoke so eloquently about this. The absolute devastation, anger, frustration, gall that people both feel and see in the actions of entities, including McKinsey, that contributed to, in some cases, death, in other cases, lasting illness and devastating harm to families, to communities. That's why we do our work, as others have said. So I thank you, Tish, for calling out Michael's memory. It's a reminder to all of us. I mean, and as we talk about today, what this is about, I just couldn't agree more. It's what it's about. So thank you for lifting that family's story up.
Yeah, and can I also thank Tish, and thank you, Avi, for being here. And we send love all the way from Oregon to you and your family.
Thank you. I have Three remaining questions. One is from Mike Forsyth at the New York Times. Can the AG's comment on whether this agreement precludes counties and municipalities from continuing their own lawsuits? In recent days, several counties have filed suits.
I will note, and my colleagues who've shown great proclivity to give you chapter and verse may add, there is a specific provision that talks about releasing claims that are within the Attorney General's office authority to release. I will leave it to my colleagues more proficient in chapter verse to point you to what that is. I also will note, as a practical matter in Colorado, and it sounds like other states have a similar philosophy, we are in this together with our local government partners, and we are working collaboratively, and the funds are going to be used primarily locally and regionally to address the crisis on the ground in communities like Alamosa here in Colorado. And so that's where my focus is.
As far as Oregon is concerned, these monies are intended for the entire state, but there's no specific mention. This is a agreement with the state only.
Thank you. This question is from Eric Larson at Bloomberg News. To any AG, does McKinsey's cooperation under this deal in any way bolster the effort to extract more money from the Sacklers in the Purdue bankruptcy case?
So I really don't want to speak about the negotiations with Sackler and/or Purdue. Again, McKinsey has settled this case. We are handling each and every case individually. I would hope that the other manufacturers and distributors in the Sackler family would take heed and recognize that it's not in their interest and/or our interest to further negotiations. That what they should be focusing on is really not the numbers, but again, on the faces, on the families, on all of those who have lost loved ones. That is what is so critically important. We need to get more resources, again, to treatments, to treatment centers, to fund education centers, to create more beds, more hospitals, more organizations that treat these individuals who are struggling and individuals who are suffering now more than ever because of COVID-19. That's what they need to understand. And they need to, again, stand up and take responsibility for their unlawful actions. And they need, again, to recognize that McKinsey has done the right thing, and we urge them to do the right thing in honor and in memory of all of the Michaels around this country. This is for me, this is more than just about numbers. For me, this is about the faceless and the nameless, a number of individuals who have struggled as a result of this addiction. This addiction which was caused by their actions. And they need to do the right thing and resolve these matters with us now. They have, again, put profit over people. And it's just unconscionable that they continue to nickel and dime us in negotiations. It's just really unsettling. And I urge them to do the right thing and follow, again, in the path of McKinsey and just step up and do the right thing and understand the harm that they have caused.
And I'll just say, yes, I hope it helps. I hope they're listening. Hope they listen to my colleague, Tish James, because she's brilliant and articulate, and she's right.
Thank you. And the last question, besides just providing monetary settlements, will McKinsey be held criminally responsible?
Nothing in this consent judgment precludes pursuit of criminal charges. This resolves state civil charges.
Let me thank my colleagues here. I think those watching get a sense of the passion, the commitment to fighting for people, the empathy that my fellow colleagues here have shown. This leadership underscores how state attorneys general are fighting for people, standing up to the most powerful corporations, and are in this to solve problems constructively. And this is a big deal today that this is accomplished. And as has been underscored, there's a lot of more work to do. This opioid epidemic has devastated our nation and so many communities and families, like Michael's family.
Thank you. That concludes the questions. If anyone else has some closing remarks, feel free.
Just want to thank all of my colleagues for doing an amazing and incredible job. But I really want to thank the staff for all the work that they've put into this. Thank you so much on behalf of New York. And of course, thank you to my team for working and for, again, putting a gold star on the state of New York. Thank you for the work that you do.
I think this shows the work of state AGs and what we're capable of with respect to other ongoing matters. My hope is that we can see through to the same measure of accountability and justice as we've achieved here. That's our job. That's what the public deserves. But know that we stand united in continuing that pursuit, regardless of how long it takes us to get there, because we know what it's about and we know who we do this work for.
Let me just thank my colleagues as well, all 53 attorneys general who joined together in this settlement. You might be wondering about that, but we have territories out there. We have the District of Columbia, and I'm just so proud to be a part of this amazing group. As you can see, we don't just work together, we know each other, we are in close touch, and when there's a national issue, a crisis of this proportion, we work together to solve it.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes today's virtual press conference.